One, welcome to this special Red Star Over Asia live stream. It's the first time we've done one of these in a while. The last one was about the presidential election. What was that? Back in April, I believe. But yeah, it's been a while. Also, our podcast has been off for the summer. Everybody's been busy, but we are preparing season 3, so expect more audio podcast episodes soon. But to get to the point here, today we're doing this special live stream about the South Korea truckers strike. So this is a very important worker strike that is occurring in South Korea right now. As everyone knows, globally, due to the inflation crisis and a variety of other factors, there's kind of a global strike wave occurring, especially in the developed world, the UK, the US with the railroad workers, and South Korea with the truckers. So this is a very important strike and a topic, but it is difficult to get good analysis and information about it in English. So today we have a great panel together to discuss the trucker strike. So just a little bit of context. So starting in late November, the Truckers Union, which is under the umbrella Union Federation, Korean Confederation of Trade Unions, KCTU, launched a strike around minimum payment guarantees and safety issues, etc. And it has triggered kind of a political crisis in South Korea. The Yoon administration, right-wing presidential administration here in South Korea, has responded very aggressively, and it's turning into kind of a broader fight in South Korea. And the outcome of this strike is going to have very significant political consequences all across the board. So we thought it would be good to bring together a few activists and organizers who are directly involved in this struggle to talk about what's going on, give us all the context of the strike, a little bit of the brief history of what's been going on, because it's not just November. There was a strike in June. So we're going to talk about why this strike is so important, what's happened up to now, what the state of play is with the strike currently, and then also what we think might be possible outcomes of the strike. So joining us today, we'll just introduce everybody. First off, my name is Mike. I'm a co-host of Red Star Over Asia. And we have today with us comrade Sanggu here in Busan with me. I'm also in Busan. Sanggu is a member of the KCTU Busan General Union Youth Committee, and he has been actively involved in solidarity labor organizing with the trucker strike. So, Sanggu, how are you doing this Friday evening?
Hello. I think I'm very happy to introduce about Korea's movement.
Yeah, no, thank you for joining. I think a lot of people have asked us about this trucker strike and reached out to us. So there's a lot of interest in this from people around the world, especially in light of the U.S. railroad strike and how that played out. There's a lot of interesting differences in how KCTU is handling this potential strike, or actual strike now versus the U.S. situation. So a lot of people have been curious about that. All right, well, cool. And then we have Yeonwoo up in Seoul. He is a student activist, but does a lot of labor solidarity stuff as well. How are you doing this evening, Yeonwoo?
Better than usual, I guess. Well, same old, same old.
All right, cool. Anything you want to say to introduce yourself, or did I do you sufficient justice as a student labor solidarity organizer?
My main occupation is, of course, a student. But I do activism as a side gig. Well, not really a side gig, but when I have time, really. Mm-hmm. And I'm usually involved with labor solidarity actions and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I guess that's introduction for myself.
All right, very good. And just on time is our third guest here. So people who've listened to our podcast for a while know who Bori is. He's a longtime co-host of Red Star of Asia. And also I might add that Yeonwoo and Sanggu are kind of new members to our kind of Red Star burgeoning left media collective. So we're kind of in this situation where I'm interviewing people on their own show. But Bori is a labor organizer, student activist. He does all kinds of things. Marxist intellectual extraordinaire. I can't even think of all of his resume items. But anyway, he's here. He's been directly involved with, along with Yeonwoo, with the trucker strikes work in Seoul. So Sanggu and I are down in Busan. Bori is up in Seoul. So Bori, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you just fine.
Yeah, I'm trying to set up my laptop. Sorry for being late.
Okay, no worries.
Everything's really hectic for me right now. I'm not at home. I'm at the office. But anyhow, no longer a student activist. Working with labor and Marxist intellectual. I'm not sure I'll go that far. But really interested in international solidarity, and the entire point of this live stream is so that we can get it out there what's happening in South Korea. It seems like this truckers strike, although it just ended today, is very important to get it out there. And people not really knowing much about what happens on the ground in South Korea might be able to use this as sort of an entry point into the labor politics in at large, and what we're looking forward to under the Yoon administration for I don't know. This is all very shiftly changing, and I'm just back from having dinner and trying to garner a sense of what to make out of the strike ending. So let's see how it goes.
Yeah, that is breaking news. Just today, the strike has ended. So we planned this live stream just a couple of days ago. So we're going to get to that in a little bit, the latest updates. But first, let's give a little context, because a lot of people tuning into this, or people who will listen to it later as the video circulates and as we put the audio up on our podcast feed, may not know any of the context for this at all. So to just give us a general timeline of the strike, why this trucker strike is so important, let's go to Yeonwoo first to kind of give us some of the background. So this current strike that just ended today started in late November, but in June earlier this year there was another strike. So this the story kind of goes back quite far back. So Yeonwoo, can you give us some of the background of this strike?
Yeah. So actually, to really highlight, like, one of the first causes for this strike happening is actually last year. So around November to December, there was a diesel exhaust fluid. There was a diesel exhaust fluid shortage in Korea. So, if you don't know what diesel exhaust fluid is, it basically is a component, not really a component, but think of it like a fluid that is needed to make a car engine run better. So there was a shortage of that, and obviously truckers are affected by this because a lot of these equipment or material needed for their work cuts into their wages. And for a long time, it's already been brewing for quite a while, with negotiations with the government before that regarding safe rates and so and so. And with the war in Ukraine happening and with gas prices going through the roof, negotiations for changing safe rates and whatnot broke down with the government, and that eventually led to the first strike in June. And that was really the first major strike of this government since they got elected earlier this year. And that is important in its own self, because in Korea, national strikes aren't really I would say, that common. And when they do happen, the first one needs to end well, especially in favor of the union, because that really sets the mood for negotiations throughout the rest of that government. And through an 8-day strike, from what I can recall, they eventually got the biggest thing. The truckers union eventually got a promise from the government regarding changing safe rates, and that ended pretty well. The economy wasn't really hit that hard until it wasn't really based on the fact that we'll agree to the safe rates, but we'll negotiate it as a basis. The problem is, after the June strike ended, negotiations broke down, and starting from around November, when they eventually couldn't get to an agreement, the truckers union, the government couldn't get to an agreement on negotiations, and on November 4th, they said we're going on strike on the 24th. And that's the general current outline of what happened before.
Okay. All right. I'm curious. So the trucker strike, the most recent one, November, that started in November, there was a very well publicized. It was in a lot of the news, including the English language media on Korea, that the Yoon government issued a executive order demanding that the truckers return to work, or they might face steep fines and possible jail time. So in response, KCTU, which again, KCTU, for listeners who may not know, it's a union federation. It's a federation or confederation of many different unions, of which the truckers union is just one. So KCTU announced a national strike on this past Tuesday, and that means that other unions, other than the truckers union within the KCTU, strike in solidarity. Do you have any sense of like what impact that had? Did it help like increase the leverage that the truckers had in negotiations or anything?
Well, I mean,
Or is it too early to say, really?
the truckers union by itself, they have a long history of winning when they strike, especially inside the KPT, which is the public transport union. Compared to other industries, other industrial unions, the truckers, a lot of industries rely on them. Like construction relies on truckers to bring them cement. Gas stations rely on them to bring in oil. And so, in the past governments, when the truckers union did go on strike, they would usually get most of their demands. So them by themselves have a really lot of bargaining power when it comes to things. So, but in my opinion, it's just that this government came out really strong against it. Like with the return to work order, which was made in 2003 during the Roe administration, which was made in response to a trucker strike in Busan, which really hit a lot of companies back then. Which essentially is so the return to work order is it's what it says. Requesting workers to go back to work, except they don't, it's illegal, and they could have consequences regarding that. So, but after it was created, it wasn't really used because the law itself really treads on like thin ice when it comes to constitutional rights. For example, the right to strike and etc. So even like past conservative governments, when the truckers did go on strike back then, they they really considered it as a last card option because that might get them in hot water. Except this government straight up brought that hammer down without a second thought. So that kind of response was unprecedented, to say the least. And yeah, that's essentially small introduction to that question you asked about.
All right, cool. Thank you. That's really good stuff. Yeah, I mean, I get, I'm from the U.S., so I can't help but make comparisons to the U.S., but also some comrades in DSA, which I'm a member of back home, have made comparisons between the almost rail workers strike in the U.S., which you guys probably are all aware of, and how that played out versus how this trucker strike is playing out, because both involved government intervention to stop or curtail a strike. So, yeah, very interesting. All right, well, we can come back to some of that stuff later, but before we get into the broader significance of the strike, and then also I think Bori can give us some updates because yeah, this has been a fast-moving situation. So there's some stuff. We have some breaking news items regarding the strike. It's now ended. We're gonna hear some details about that shortly. But first, let's talk about what's kind of the atmosphere has been like around a lot of the actions and rallies, both in Seoul and Busan. So Sanggu and I both live in Busan. Last weekend, we were both at a solidarity demonstration in Busan. It was about 5,000 people. Seoul had similar numbers. We're going to see what Yeonwoo and Bori have to say about what that was like and what the general kind of vibe has been with the movement in Seoul. But first, let's go to Sanggu to talk about Busan. So Sanggu, you are, as I said before, active member in the Busan General Union Youth Committee, very involved in all kinds of labor activities. You're always inviting me to so many actions and demonstrations. I try to catch as many as I can. So what's your take, Sanggu, on kind of how this stuff is played out locally here in Busan?
From November 24th at Shinsan-deok, Choksor is doing a tent sit, which I think it is unfortunately ended. Busan Progress Party also joined the sit-in with their own tent. And at December 3rd, there was Nationwide Workers' Rally, which is the rally that Mike and I joined at the Busan Newport three-way street. And KPTU and KCTU unions in Yeongnam joined the. Sorry, I think I should.
You're breaking up a
change
little
my-
bit there. It's okay.
Oh, okay.
We can hear you though. Yeah, keep going. Sorry, just a little
KCTU
audio distortion.
Unions in Yeongnam joined the Busan rally, and on December 5th, there was one-man protest over the Busan to support the truck strike. And on December 6th, KCTU national strike took place at the Shinsan-deok. From December 7th to December 9th, action for the victory of truck strike, which was conducted by Busan KCTU, took the place at front of the Busan People's Power Party. I think that's everything.
Yeah, it was a really interesting event. I mean, so I've been to many. This is just my perspective as a U.S. person, because the South Korean left and the U.S. left kind of organize actions and mass demonstrations in very different ways. So it was very interesting. Just the I guess one of my favorite things was the KCTU dance teams. So for anybody listening who's never been to a KCTU led, and this is not unique to KCTU, it's kind of a South Korean thing. There are these like dance teams, and you get a group of dancers who are dancing to these kind of classic movement songs. So it was a very festive, kind of optimistic, kind of fighting atmosphere in Busan. I really enjoyed the demonstration. I mean, it was politically important, but it was also just like sort of a fun kind of communal action and event. So cool. Thanks for that report back. And as Yeonwoo said before, and is mentioned elsewhere, so a lot of the trucking hubs and shipping hubs are actually outside of Seoul. So Seoul, about half the population lives in Metro Seoul, but a lot of these transport workers are actually based elsewhere. So Busan has been a hub for some of the transport workers organizing. All right, let's see. How about we'll go to Bori first, then Yeonwoo. So Bori, what's your kind of take on how was the vibe and the atmosphere up in Seoul around this strike? Like, what kind of organizations and communities were involved in strike support aside from the union? What's your kind of general evaluation of how things went down?
Right. So, uh, I guess it's inevitable that we talk about how current situation colors our prior experiences, because and that is to emphasize that the strike has indeed ended after 16 days of blocking major uh, transportation hubs, etc., and also refusing to participate in any sort of transportation of goods. But that said, I guess I'll have to additionally add that I haven't been to the transportation hub specifically in the Seoul Gyeonggi area. I was busy doing other stuff, so I'll get to that. So maybe Yeonwoo will be able to speak on that. What I wanted to bring up was the solidarity strike, which was
Hmm.
by the construction workers union, and this was practically the only union that had openly put out a statement criticizing the government and mass media for trying to create a worker versus worker situation, and said that we're not falling for that. We explicitly know that the government is putting the trucker workers at risk, and we stand in solidarity with them. And when the government said that they will bring in any uh, institution or process to put down the strike, they said that they would do the same in solidarity. They would do the opposite to sustain the strike. Now, the situation from construction is that because one of the sectors that has the safe rate system applied is cement, and that immediately connects to the situation of construction where a lot of cement is used in, say, building apartments. This time around the year, business is slow, so a lot of people, it's very hard to get workers to work. It's very cold, etc. So it's practically a strike anyhow. But the construction workers union was able to turn that around and put out a statement in solidarity with the truckers, and I think that's quite significant. That required a lot of effort to put that statement out, and uh, yeah, I'll leave it to Yonu to explain what the one of the big transportation hubs was like.
Cool. Go ahead, Yanu.
Right. So, you know how a lot of imports are not directly shipped off from like per se ports or airports. They all get these places called inland um, distribution centers. We call them in short ICD, inland clearance depots. So from there, truckers ship whatever their order go to places, for example, construction sites or gas stations, etc. So Gyeonggi province was naturally really a hotspot for a lot of these rallies and actions. For example, it's kind of a tradition whenever there's a trucker strike. Um, uh, so the strike official first strike protest was at Uiwang ICD. There are a lot of people. I think about a 900 to 1,000 truckers gathered and started the strike, and also other places as I forgot, but certainly Yuang the most important place because it's one of the largest distribution centers around the capital. So pretty big meaning to that. And by the ninth day of the strike, the import and export rates of the distribution center dropped to 8.2%. So that's a lot. But naturally, as it's a hotspot for the union itself, a lot of scuffles between non-union members and even with police. About 7 got arrested in the protest last June. And that happened. And
One additional context is that because these are distribution centers, the pathways in and out of the centers are quite they serve as bottlenecks. So if you put a truck in front of that, you completely block access to it, and that's why it's a crucial point
I forgot about that.
to pull off a strike. Another is that although there are scuffles between non-union members and union members, there's also very high participation and support from non-union members, because those that have experienced the safe rate system have experienced a life where they can go home and eat chicken with their children, for example. Otherwise, without that safe rate system applied, and I guess Yeonwoo or Sanggu will be explaining what that is in more detail a bit later. Uh, it lets the workers not have to work that much overtime and going extra with all the cargo that they're shipping. They're being able to put in less hours for more or less the same wage, because they're earning minimum wage while working 14 to 16 hours a day, sleeping 4 hours a day, etc. Uh, so that means that because this also applied to the entire cement sector plus a couple others, it means that non-union members were affected as well. Now, because the system ends at the end of this year, they are refusing to go before the system was applied. And that's why you see a very high participation and support for those that a lot of them have been interviewed and they're feeling guilt for not being able to participate in the strike itself, or were able to participate in the strike itself, but they were very supportive to the extent that we've seen some truckers put on banners on their trucks saying that I support the strike basically, but I'm forced to work by the executive order, um, and this is what makes everyone on the roads very in danger. So it's not just union versus non-union. There's a very high non-union membership support of the strike. Yeah.
That's a really important point. Yeah, it's interesting. All right, well, before we get into the broader significance of the strike, and as Bori said, Sanggu and Yeonwoo can elaborate on kind of the specific issues that drove this strike, particularly this minimum wage guarantee that was kind of the primary issue here, and has a lot of related ancillary issues around it. So there's been a lot of outside of the union, kind of other social movement organizations, social movements, kind of general solidarity with the strike. Can anybody here elaborate on what kinds of organizations were involved? Like, so a lot of there's been a lot of university student activists, obviously, who've been doing strike support. That's always been like sort of a very historically important relationship in the left, labor and student solidarity. Maybe we can go to Yeonwoo. You're a student activist up in Seoul. Can you just give us sort of a snapshot of some of the uh, social movements that have supported this strike and how they've done that? In what ways?
On a local level, for example, around campuses, there have been a lot of clubs or just individual students putting up posters in support of the truckers' strike. Regarding the civic society in general, a lot of organizations turned out to support the strike, which was really fresh. Like from various religious organizations to just your local civic groups. Basically, I would say that most of the civic society around where in Seoul came up and like really adamant support for the strike itself, because it's not only about labor issues. Like for example, the whole point of it is to increase freight rates, as in safe rates themselves. So it's not only about truckers getting a livable wage; it's also about keeping the roads safe. So that's a cause, or, a cause that a lot of people can get behind. So not even like activists, like ordinary citizens would go by picketing or protest and show their support. So the general vibe, at least where I live in, is really good. It's not really easy to see people come out for support and strikes in general. So yeah, it was a really good atmosphere. In general, on civic groups and among ordinary citizens.
All right, cool. All right, well, thanks for all that great analysis from on the ground. All right, well, let's
We can continue on that.
okay, yeah,
So
if you have something to say, go ahead.
so it's it's very divided, I would say. The government has been pushing anti KCTU, anti trade union rhetoric, uh, red baiting, etc. And a lot of people do find that on the one hand, yes, the Yoon administration is really going extra. They're really trying very hard to attack the unions. Um, but it's okay. The KCTU, the trade unions are very self-centered. They are part of the quote unquote. This is not coming from a third worldist perspective. They are quote unquote the labor aristocracy, uh, and um, so so on the one hand, you will see very virulent, very violent, very rampant hatred towards the strike, and the mass media. A lot of it is really uh, putting in the effort to kind of build into that sentiment. They have these. They've been working really hard to build that. But on the other hand, one of the things that I was involved with was organizing a one day, what can I say, one day event where all across Seoul, civil society orgs would come out in support of the truckers' strike, especially in the morning when everyone is going to their jobs. And the turnout was quite impressive. We were doing it in a very short time frame, but we mobilized 400 people across 100 distinct locations, and it was interesting to see what those different experiences were like. So the people handing out flyers and doing holding a picket line in Gwanghwamun, which is one of the big tourist locations. There's a large plaza at there. Uh, they were talking about how people were really interested in reading the flyers in detail, and then some people at the KCTU, they were talking about how usually the phone calls they get at the office is usually hate calls. You will have these random passerby just calling into the office and going off on a rant, and they would be really frustrated and trying to reply to all that with manners, basically. But after that event, there were really nice phone calls. They were calling in to show support. This is a very difficult time. The media is really antagonistic. The government is not allowing any conversation to be held at all. But yet we support the truckers. So hold on there. And then yeah. So people, there are these. So on the one hand, the state is mobilizing a sort of hatred, a sort of trying to otherize the trade unions and scapegoat them into consolidating support. and it is working to an extent. But on the other hand, they are it's not it's this is unprecedented, as Yeonwoo explained earlier. This is really going out extra, as I'm trying to keep on saying, and there is a limit to how much the mass media can garner support or create a discourse of its own. And I think uh, I've just looked at a recent survey, and they showed that only 20% were supportive of the government's actions against the trade unions. So the left and a lot of social movements were concerned that the ratings, the polls in support of the Yoon administration were growing from like around 30% at its lowest to over 40 right now. But yet half of that, or only half of that, are supportive of what the Yoon administration was doing in being very law and order-ish towards the truckers union, and the rest, like 60%, I think, were against it. Yet the government, through that law and order rhetoric and being very harsh without and fully refusing to hold any kind of conversation, did succeed in pulling off the strike. We will get to that later on.
All right, cool. Well, before we move on to the broader significance of the strike, because as we're about to get into this strike, it just seems like one trucker strike maybe to someone outside of South Korea, but a lot of the demands actually go quite deep in terms of reforming basic trade union law, issues raised around the constitutionality of the Yoon administration's back to work order, etc. So before we get into that, any other further thoughts from Yeonwoo or Sanggu about the civil society, kind of the way this has been supported by the broader public topic before we dive into that? All right, well, let's get into why this strike is so important. So,
Well, I guess we could talk about. I've brought up the illegality, like the government going extra into pulling off the back to work executive order, and the ILO has intervened, saying that this is going against their conventions. Sanggu did some research on this, and I think this might be a good point to go in on that. So South Korea is not isolated from the world. It's a very export-centered economy. So its economy relies a lot on trade deals, and that is precisely where the ILO can have leverage.
can I stop you real quick? Can you explain to the listeners, current and future, of this episode, what is the ILO for people who may not know?
The International Labor Organization, but I will leave the rest to Sanggu to elaborate.
All right, Sanggu, you want to talk about the intervention of this international labor organization that kind of, so the ILO sort of tries to, or at least its stated purpose is to try to maintain some degree of uniformity between countries in terms of labor standards. Can you talk a little bit about the ILO and how they've intervened regarding Yoon's response to the trucker strike?
After the National Assembly passed the ratification motion for the
Oh, you're a little quiet there. Can you speak up a little bit? Get a little closer to your mic.
after is it better?
Yeah, that's better. Cool.
After the National Assembly passed the ratification motion for the three core conventions in February 2021, the MOEL said at the time that the ratification of our core conventions holds great meaning in external terms, and that we will be contributing to enhancing our national prestige and national credibility by honoring our commitments to the international community, and it will also help reduce trade risk by lowering the potential for disputes over free trade agreements containing labor-related provisions, including the South Korean European Union FTA. ILO's intervention must be taken more seriously than in the past, as it comes after the Korean government's ratification of ILO Conventions number 87, Freedom of Association, 98, Protections for Collective Bargaining, and 29, Forced Labor. Korean government downplayed the significance of the ILO's intervention as a simple request for an opinion made on a customary basis. However, according to the Luan Subasinga, ITF Director General of the law, who was in charge of the ILO intervention was not just for asking the Korean government's opinion, but offering Korean government to follow the ILO conventions when solving the conflict. Luan Subasinga also mentioned that the evaluation of intervention is diplomatically discourtesy and undignified behavior. He also said supervisory body's decision can may differ from the intervention, but it is still diplomatically important.
Okay, so yeah, so the KCTU kind of appealed to the ILO to intervene because KCTU has challenged the constitutionality and the legality of Yoon's imposition of this work order. And there is a long-running kind of demand that pops up in KCTU labor struggles around reform of a certain aspect of South Korea's national labor law. So maybe Sanggu or Yeonwoo or Bori, can anyone elaborate on that? So there's a demand for. I have a. Let me see if I can find it right here. I think I still have my sign from the. Oh, here it is. Yeah. So this was my. Yeah, here it is, right here. So reform. Reform, what is it? Article 2, Section 3 of the Labor Code. Yeah, who can one of you elaborate what this is? Why did KCTU feel that it was necessary? Why is this a central demand where they print it on posters and hand it out to participants at their rallies? Why is it important to reform this part of the Labor Code?
Yeonwoo, you want to give it a go?
Nah. Like,
Right, so
Article 2, no.
so right now the constitution. So labor rights are recognized in the Constitution, and its labor rights are interesting. They are distinctive from other rights that are recognized by the state. That they are, by definition, collective. The right to organize, the right for collective action, right to collective recognition. I'm not sure those are the correct terms, but anyhow, they're all collective, but they're also undermined by the specific laws that implement and try to guarantee those rights, because labor rights are not the only things that are recognized in the Constitution, because we live in under capitalism, and South Korea is very capitalist from its inception. They also recognize property rights, and that is precisely what goes against labor rights in a lot of situations. Now, the particular configuration of class struggle up to this point means that those labor rights are currently not being recognized that much. And in particular, the KCTU annually puts forward a series of demands that they think the leadership thinks is important for the entire democratic labor struggle to pursue. And they are pretty much more or less the same iteration, different iterations of the same core demand. This year, the demand is expressed through the reform of the trade union laws, Article 2 and 3. 2 relates to who are recognized as workers, because, and then 3 relates to what happens when you pull off a strike. What happens is that the companies start suing the trade unions and the individual workers that participate in the strike for all the losses that they had experienced throughout the strike. And these amount to massive figures, which lead to workers committing suicide continuously. One of the significant strikes of this year, I did post that this was the most significant. This might be the strike of the year, but another important one was back in the summer when the construction workers at Daewoo Joseon, the subcontracted workers, irregular workers, they pulled off the strike and held off a dock from putting in construction. They were sued to astronomical amounts. They are currently fighting to not have to pay those fines. But if they were to pay it in the end, they would have to be working 500 years nonstop without spending any dime to be able to repay those debts. So it basically makes it impossible for trade unions to pull off strikes. Uh, and the government is currently also waiving that they're threatening to sue with regards to this truckers strike as well. They're currently claiming 1조 won. Does anyone know how to put that in English terms? Uh, that's the amount of economic damage that the government claims has been caused by the truckers strike. Uh, roughly like 10 billion, $1 billion, something like that. It's I'm probably missing it by several magnitudes, but it's just ridiculous. It's astronomical, and that's the key
Trillion.
point. $1 trillion or 1 trillion
No,
won?
one. It's 1 trillion.
1 trillion won.
Yeah, it's 1 trillion won. So about
1,000.
1 billion USD, I guess. Yeah.
Yes, I guess something like that.
Roughly, I mean,
roughly,
it's exchange rate.
It's probably off by a couple of magnitudes, but the sentiment is what
only
matters.
a few $100 million. What's
It's astronomical. It's impossible to repay, and that's what's being used. If people are fined like this, they can't continue on living because they will be bankrupt, and those debts will continue on to their children, to their families. So this completely blocks trade unions from being able to strike. That's article number 3. Number 2 regards the legal status of workers. And usually, because there are rights granted for workers in the Constitution, another way going out of that, a loophole being used, is to not recognize them as workers in the first place. This is what happened to the truckers 20 years ago. So they were now recognized as self-employed. And this is a major point that the government tries to make, that because these aren't workers, this is technically not a strike. These are self-employed people refusing to run their businesses, and that makes it really ironic, because they're also saying that because of that they are able to put out this executive back to work order. But this goes against the freedom to work or not. Like the president has always emphasized that freedom, like if you look at his speeches, freedom is emphasized like several dozen times every speech. But he doesn't recognize the freedom for business owners to not work. But on the other hand, they also do not recognize this as a strike. So they are clearly trying very hard to make everything this illegal. And they claim that this is illegal, but usually what happens when strikes are illegal is that they arrest the heads, the presidents of the trade union. This didn't happen. So they also know that this isn't technically illegal, but they're claiming that. But this is why the Articles 2 and 3, the reform of that, is very important, because this regards to every single trade union struggle in this country. And this is also why the truckers union, was important in like they were at the forefront of this struggle in trying to reform it. I can get into the details of that later on, but I think we might want to talk about something else before that.
Okay, well, very interesting. Yeah, we talked about this a little last night. There's been a similar, not quite the same, but there has been a similar transition in the U.S. In the trucking industry away from truckers being, you go back to the sort of 70s heyday of the Teamsters, when the vast majority of truckers were organized. There was something called the Master Freight Agreement, where all the big trucking companies were organized under one contract. And now, it's increasingly common for truckers to be essentially independent contractors. They own their own trucks, or at least they own them, but they're paying payments on those trucks, and they're kind of individual contractors, which seems to be the case with you were talking about the non-union participation in the strike by these sort of independent contractor truckers. So it's an interesting dynamic going on there. All right, so we talked about the ILO and how KCTU has appealed to the ILO to issue some kind of statement or intervene in some way that Yoon's invocation of illegality of the strike is illegitimate and bullshit. Let's talk a little bit about consolidation of support by conservatives being anti-KCTU. So this is something I'm personally interested in. I think a lot of people who are going to see this video or hear the podcast version in the coming days will be interested in. So just for listeners, there are two main union federations in South Korea. We have the FKTU, which was legal under the military dictatorship period of South Korea. My wife actually was a member of FKTU, so I can tell you personally that Union Federation fucking sucks. They don't do shit. So KCTU, however, is, it is accurately maligned in the mainstream South Korean media as being leftist, as in actually being a real trade union with energy and militancy, etc. So FKTU is the larger of the two, but KCTU is a little over 1 million members, and that they are the ones leading the strike right now. So KCTU has often been the target of conservatives. There's been a lot of red baiting. For those who may not know listening, South Korea has a kind of arcane Cold War era National Security Act that was ostensibly targeted towards people who were collaborating with North Korea, but it's often been used as a broad brush to suppress trade union movements and other left progressive social movements. So that kind of rhetoric is always thrown out at KCTU. There was a recent meeting that President Yoon had with some cabinet ministers. I believe it was with people from the Ministry of Transportation it was related to the strike. He compared the strike. He said it was basically comparable to the nuclear threat from North Korea. There's been some other attempts to red bait KCTU around this. So maybe Bori or Yeonwoo or Sanggu, anybody who wants to jump up for this, can you just give a little context for listeners about the history of conservatives kind of consolidating support and like uniting around being anti-KCTU? KCTU is this sort of leftist fifth column boogeyman in South Korean society. Any takers? I'm going to call on somebody.
So
take it away.
When so anti-unionism really goes back, not even during the Sixth Republic, really goes back to before the Korean War. Back then, which is like the real old days, like when my grandfather was still a child. So back then, the labor movement was dominated by the South Korean Workers' Party, which was the last Korean Communist Party to exist in the legal defined definition of South Korea. And at the government at the time, the Syngman Rhee government cracked down on them hard because first thing, they did a general strike, which really nearly led to guerrilla action, and it was like at the peak of the Cold War, and the right-wing government wasn't just going to let that slide, and the National Council of Workers, which it was called, was banned. And that effectively ended independent labor movements for the rest of the century until the 1980s. Until then, like you mentioned, that the FKTU, it was initially propped up as a front, more as a front for pro-government. Trade unions, but not really unions anyways. They're some were related to organized far right wing violence, and as democracy came about, workers started to realize like the FKTU sucks, man. Like we have to create a new labor movement, and that eventually led to the creation of the KCTU. But it really comes to a head in 1997, which there was a general strike back then. So the government back then tried to pass labor laws that were, really ridiculous. Cuts wages, makes it easier for companies to fire workers. The KCTU and the FKTU managed to organize a general strike then, and that really marks the modern beginning between the KCTU and the government's anti-union rhetoric. So, that really comes to a head, after the Roe government, which was kind of liberal, but it's starting from the Lee government and the Park governments, where labor and government relations really start to break down, which eventually you could say that led to the impeachment and so. But the
impeachment of who? Can you explain that for our listeners?
The impeachment of Park Geun-hye, the previous president. Also,
just a quick thing for people who may not know. Park Geun-hye is the daughter of Park Chung-hee, who was a right-wing authoritarian president of Korea. So, and then his daughter, who, to put it politely, didn't quite match his intellect or talents. There was a hilarious anecdote where one of her defense attorneys actually used a defense in court when she was accused of organizing a criminal conspiracy, that she actually wasn't intelligent enough to organize a conspiracy at that level. But that's the context. There was a huge movement, the Candlelight Revolution, which that was pretty well reported in Western media. But KCTU, in my understanding, provided a lot of the organizational backbone for that movement.
Definitely. Like since 2015, before 2 years before the impeachment, they continuously organized, yada yada. But that really shows between how much the conservative, parties or the conservative establishment in general, it's like they just despise unions. Because first thing, the Korean economy was propped up and actually developed over the years without any backlash from workers themselves. So you see, once they see unions popping out here and there, they're going to start panicking, because a strong labor movement doesn't exactly align in the interests of conservatives in general. Also, lobbying from companies, from capital in general, like most of those anti-labor laws, whenever they do try to get appealed, always come in some form of backlash from business organizations, really big ones, even from Samsung sometimes. So the entire the entire game regarding labor company relations or labor government regulations, they're all rigged more favorably to capital, and yet the government and the right keep pandering and red baiting, saying that this is like the equivalent to North Korea firing a missile. It's like you since you're American, you're familiar with the PACO strike, right? The air traffic controller strike. Yeah. Back when Reagan also called the PACO strike a national emergency. So, and from what I'm hearing, President Yoon has taken notes from that. So
yeah, it seems like it. It seems yeah, I actually went back when this happened. I actually went back and read a bit more about the PATCO strike to refresh my memory. It does. It does seem like he's studied that playbook. Considering you want to crack down on unions generally. I mean, also Margaret Thatcher too. The way she approached the miners' unions in the 80s, like the enemy within was her kind of famous phrase, kind of painting unions as this kind of anti-patriotic sort of, they're willing to sacrifice the economy for their selfish interests. And they're, kind of red baiting. That happened a lot with the miners' union as well. There's I think Yoon, I've often doubted his intellectual sophistication, also his wife's giving the kind of hilarious scandals with her prolific plagiarism, it seems,
Definitely.
academically. But no, it does seem like he's studied the playbooks of the OG neoliberals, Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. So,
Yeah,
good point.
I think that also goes into with his personality of being a former prosecutor. During his time, he jailed a lot of high profile figures, 2 presidents, former military generals, and so. And even though his intellectual capacity might seem low, but then again, like the only thing he really does know is keeping the law and following his law book. So
Right.
in his eyes, these truckers who aren't even officially recognized as workers say they're going on strike. He's going to look at Reagan, huh? He managed to do that. Why can't I?
Yeah, it's a very good point.
I don't want to psychologize him too much, but on the context of looking at, like, I was trying to wrap my head around what we were to expect from the Yoon administration, and we did a live stream about this last time when the elections were being counted, the results were being counted, and I was really divided. On the one hand, I did think that not his intellectual prowess, I don't think that's really important, but I didn't think he was politically sophisticated enough to really do stuff. Like, I was more concerned about his cabinet, and then also the high level government bureaucrats who would be able to start doing whatever the hell they wanted, because they did not have like a very strong leadership from above. Because usually what you want to do, because in South Korea, those government bureaucrats really do have a lot of free reign to do what they want, and you need to really pull them in to be able to control them and guide the government apparatus. That was what I was expecting, and whenever Yoon started to go off about like drinking casually, going home early, not working on the weekends, enjoying that work-life balance, like I was saying, like go on, yeah, do that. Like as long as you're not wrecking havoc, I would prefer you not do your job as a president. Like I was
Right.
contrasting that to previous President Lee, Lee Myung-bak, because he was a really prolific worker. Like he would wake up at 4 a.m. and start privatizing the shit out of everything. So, contrasting to that, Yoon drinking his evenings off was a good thing. Now, but he was being so ineffective in governing that he was being one of the most. I think this was reported fairly in English as well, so a lot of people might be a bit more familiar about it. But he was practically the most unpopular leader of the world. Now,
Yeah, he got to Joe Biden approval ratings in like 2 months. Very impressive feat.
like he was dropping into his 20s of support, like, and this is his 6 month in. Like he hasn't been governing for 4 years and he's dropping popularity. He hasn't finished a single year yet. So that makes him being very harsh against the trade unions that much more important. That shows that he can garner support around that single gesture. And because the strike has been called off right now, it has been successful to an extent. The strike has failed to an extent. This has been a big L for the labor union, for the social movements, etc. Uh, because the Yoon administration has been actively trying to uh, isolate the KCTU, the labor union movement, etc. We also have to take into consideration all the strikes that were happening up to this point, because December was hell of a month, at least the beginning of it, because uh, we were seeing the Seoul metro system, the trade unions there going on strike for the first time since 2016. We were seeing the railroad workers going on strike. We were seeing the big national hospital workers going on strike. We were seeing the entire public sector going on strike. And precisely because of that, the government really wrapped up those strikes giving good terms for the negotiations fairly quickly. For example, for the railroad system, because the truckers were refusing to transport cement, they were trying to use the railroad system to block off the strike. This was mentioned by the current president of the Seoul, the National Railway System Trade Union. Uh, that the reason why the ozone station was opened up very quickly, despite a worker there dying, I think a couple of months ago. This was fairly recent. The standard process would be to close that station for 6 months to a year, and then try to employ more workers for the safety, go through the process and see what went wrong, what caused the death, etc., etc. The government explicitly pushed to reopen that station and make it work again because they needed to transport the cement. And that's why the railroad system workers were able to get good terms on their negotiation fairly quickly. Same with the subway, same with the hospital, etc. Because if all the public sector is going on strike alongside with the truckers, then the national economy is completely in the hands of the workers. The government worked very quickly to not make that situation arise. There were internal differences within the trade unions, like the leadership being much more favorable to pull off negotiations, etc., etc. But this was largely, I guess, state management. So the Yoon administration is showing that despite them being completely insufferable and also very ineffective in any other portions of managing the state, they've been more or less successful in neutralizing opposition. So that's what I wanted to bring up.
All right. Well, great stuff, everyone. Yeah, this is very interesting. This is really good analysis. It's hard to get from anywhere else in English. So, Bori, you mentioned that the strike ended today. So, as we said at the outset, there's this has been a fast-moving situation. This strike. So, the strike has ended. Bori, maybe you can lead us off, and then Yeonwoo and Sanggu can then chime in because Bori, you've been sort of maybe the most directly involved in the strike out of the three of you guys, but in different ways. So the strike ended today. Under what terms did the strike end? Can you tell us what happened exactly? How did the strike end? Why did KCTU end the strike?
So two things. The executive back to work order is an very extreme measure. It allows the government to sue the workers that have been involved in the strike, but it also allows the government to revoke the licenses for the truckers to be able to work in the first place. And because there was a high non-union uh, participation and support of the strike, this affects them most directly. These people are the least organized. They have not have a lot of prior experience to this. They just want to be able to return home safely, and that's why they were being supportive of it. But when the government pulled down very strong measures, they were uh, most likely to pull off from the ranks. The second was what happened yesterday. The Minju Party, without consulting the trade truckers union, agreed to the government's terms. The government had put forward a a measure that was even worse than what had been employed for the past 3 years. Basically, they the truckers union were demanding that the safe rate system be applied to other sectors and also other different types of trucks so that an expansion of what would be applied. Currently, only 6% of all truckers fall under the safe rate system. They wanted to expand it massively because they saw it work. They experienced it working. Non-union members experienced it working. The second would be to continue it indefinitely. The current system was only for 3 years. The government proposal was to let it dissolve. They demanded it be a permanent thing. the government's proposal on the one hand would be not to expand it at all, and also let it expire after 3 years once again. Plus, they would absolve any responsibility from the contractors, the owners of the goods that the truckers were shipping. I haven't been seeing more details of what sort of responsibility that amounted to, whether it was about safety, was it about wages, etc. But but the truckers unions, the people putting out statements said that it absolved the responsibility. So that's the extent of my understanding. Uh, so those two things, very harsh measures, cracking down on the strike, very hostile media environment for the truckers, which might be something to be expected from those more seasoned in the labor union, but not definitely not for those that were just starting to participate in the strike. And second, because of that, I guess lack of experience, I guess a lot of people participating in the strike, especially those non-union members, were more relying on the Minju Party, the Democrats, to hold their line. They didn't. They did not consult the union in deciding that. So the union held a vote today, and the majority decided to pull off the strike. So there aren't any terms for negotiation. The government is stating that you pull off the strike, then we can talk. So the government is not conceding anything. The capital is not conceding anything. The strike has been pulled off without any concessions at all. What we're seeing is that it just broke under pressure. So this is, I guess, a devastating uh, loss, and that's why I was spending a large portion of my evening trying to make sense of it. Like, where do we go forward from this? Despite its significance, I guess the leadership and union members will have to start building anew. They will have to start organizing from the bottom and make the strike more effective next time. And but also with the recognition that a lot of momentum has been lost, but there's no way forward. The discrepancy between the good owners, capital, and the actual workers, the transportation workers, the truckers, this has grown over the past 10 years, and this growment means that truckers have to put in more time to make ends meet, which means that they are working extra hours, they're cutting sleep, and that makes the roads much more dangerous. And this makes not only them, like, this is something that the truckers union put out in their statement. Uh, the deaths from truckers, when you go on long durations without any sleep, there's a higher possibility of having a heart attack. So
Absolutely.
truckers die before the car accidents a lot of truckers get involved with is because they've died on the spot before the trucks ram into something else.
Right.
Those are not counted in car accidents, and this will continue at infinitum. Plus, a large portion of the truckers are very aged, so we're not
Yeah.
looking at 20-year-olds that are going into debt to own trucks to transport goods. We're looking at people in their 50s and 60s, and these people not being in their prime makes them much more
Well,
susceptible
yeah. Well, as
to
someone, some of my family members, uncles, etc., are truckers, and it's also a very sedentary activity. If you're not, you're not moving much during the.
you're
So
not
yeah,
moving much.
heart
You
heart
can't
issues, cardiovascular issues are very
heart
big deal.
you can't go to restaurants, you can't go to restrooms because you can't park your stuff, and
Yeah.
you're also very working overtime. So
Mhm.
this means they are very socially isolated, and it makes the work very miserable. And these are the
Mhm.
conditions that the truckers have experienced can be avoided under the safe rate system. This was shown through the enthusiastic participation, but this has been struck down. The strike has been pulled off, etc. Um, and it's quite sad, honestly.
Mm.
We're putting a lot of effort in trying to support the strike and sustain it. It hasn't worked, and we will have to see whether a lot of more heroic efforts in trying to rebuild this from the ground up will succeed once again. But the truckers union has been going through worse for the past 20 years. The safe rate system being employed was a concession that they forced out from the government in the first place. So this isn't unprecedented. We might be seeing something along the way. It's just that we're not like in a situation where we're excited to talk about the strike continuing on. We are sad to report that it has ended today.
All right. Well, thank you. That's really great analysis and very well put. All right. Well, how about this? We're getting to the point where we're talking about where we go from here. I mean, as Bori sort of implied, we don't really know where we're going from here, but we can make wild guesses and some sort of somewhat informed speculation. So, how about let's go to Sanggu, Yeonwoo, and then Bori. If after they go, you have any final thoughts, we can sort of tie it up there, and then this will be an ongoing struggle. So we will. We've already talked about doing future, maybe possibly monthly live streams in addition to prepping our season 3 for this fall, our normal kind of audio only pre-prepared, pre-recorded episodes. But let's go ahead and go to Sanggu and then Yeonwoo. So Sanggu, do you have any thoughts about the strike wrapping up today and ending today and where things might go from here?
I was like, I think like strike wrapped up because other KPTU union was not able to.
Oh, sorry. Can you repeat that? You broke up just there. So you said other KCTU unions were not able to.
Other
KPTU?
KPTU unions were not able to show their solidarity. I talked with the railroad union worker. He was very angry about the leadership not showing the solidarity to the Truxell. And I think it is all I have to say.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, the strike just ended today. So no worries if you don't have a ready-made profound analysis. Yeah. But those are good initial impressions. Yeah. We're all going to be thinking about this in the next coming days. Yeonwoo, any thoughts about the strike ending today and where you think things might go from here? Kind of your summation of this experience, positive and negative lessons to learn from this. I mean, again, it will take a while to process it. It just ended today, but any initial kind of thoughts about the whole thing?
I'm just worried that this is going to put other unions in the mood for the rest of the government. Really the truckers strike, the truckers union is really it is a force to be reckoned with within the labor movement. But seeing them lose this strike in a way that not a lot of us thought was possible, it really it makes me worried. But then again, the social movements or trade union movement in Korea always has its ups and downs. It just happens to be one of the bad days. The second thing is regarding more of the political side to this whole mess is when I heard the news of the Democrats pulling out and just voting for the government motion, I wondered what if could have anything been different if any of the progressive parties had enough seats to really have an impact on the negotiations. So still, it's a question that's been thrown around around Korean social movements all the time. Without progressive parties in parliament, in the National Assembly, actually, if you don't have enough of them, there's no point. There's there's a limit to how much change you can bring through with like social movements and the trade union movement in general. If you don't have people speaking up in politics or in the capital for us, it's going to be even harder. So what I took away from this is that we need more people in the National Assembly speaking up for working rights.
All right. Yeah, I agree. Very well said. All right. Well, Bori, any additional thoughts before we kind of wrap it up here? And again, this will be a
we
topic
have
revisit
we
in
have
the
a
future.
question from the chat. So,
Oh,
what
we
percentage
do. Sorry, I have not
of
been monitoring that. All right.
truckers is there
Can you
only
read that
one-
question for us, Bori?
Yes. What percentage of truckers are union members? Is there only one union? So, the government refuses to see truckers as workers, and they and in continuation of that, they also try to refuse to recognize the truckers union as a union, workers trade union as well. So yes, there is only one union, and that is also very contested. Uh, the percentage of workers being in the union, I think, is not that high. I think it's in the single digits. Uh, but right again, non-union membership participation was very high in this year's strike, and also, as Yeonwoo mentioned, continuously, truckers' strikes are very powerful. I've also mentioned earlier that this distribution centers are bottlenecks which the truckers can very effectively use in proceeding with their strikes.
Also, my understanding too was a lot of the truckers who were striking. There are different kinds of truckers who transport different goods. Like there were concrete mixers, etc. So the strike was sort of planned in a way where it was strategically planned where like certain truckers who were transporting like key commodities or key ingredients for like construction materials were involved, and that sort of was why it had such a huge monetary cost. Like you mentioned about 1 billion, or wait, I guess 1 trillion won. I always mix up my USD and my Korean won calculations. So yeah, my understanding is like KCTU was quite clever in planning that. Like, so it was a small number of truckers, but they were transporting like strategically important
Yes.
commodities for construction, right?
I'm looking at a statistic: 5% of all truckers being in the union. But yeah, uh, now prospects. Uh, so maybe this sets the mood for the next 5 years. Maybe not. We also have to consider that for the past 5 years, we were under a liberal government, and that allowed a lot of social movements to be co-opted into the state and complicit. And with the government being turned back into conservatives alongside the Seoul mayor, uh, the return of Oh Se-hoon, who was the Seoul mayor until he he lost his job in 2011. He has returned as mayor again, and uh, they are very trying very hard to destroy previous legacies of the liberal government administrations, and that means that I think this might be a sort of a this destroys a lot of expectations and worsens conditions on a political level, etc. But also is makes those that were complacent a bit more aware. I don't want to go into a rant where uh, 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 society's conditions worsening makes conditions for social movements better. I don't think that. I think
Yeah.
there's a dialectic where you build upon previous struggles and work on those victories, etc.
Absolutely.
Uh, but yet, a lot of leadership is complacent in that, and dire conditions also do create more fierce opposition and resistance. So I think it's too early to say that this will set up the mood, and we will have to see what comes along. Now, one of the things that will come along that has been brewing up was the Yoon administration's absolute desolate failure in preventing the disaster in Itaewon on a Halloween. So we were seeing 156 people, youths, being crushed to death uh, in a single night, and every single one of those motherfuckers that were responsible in preventing that from happening in the first place, they were calling the truckers' strike a social disaster. How fucking dare they?
Good.
Now,
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Very good point.
what happened? What has recently happened was the families of the deceased. About 80 people have gathered together, have organized, and they have started to become vocal about their demands. And next week on Friday is the 49th day since the disaster, and this is very important in terms for mourning. So we will be seeing much more opposition organized around that. I think we can guarantee that. Now, how that will proceed, how will that proceed on the 100th day, which will be in February? We will have to see. How will that proceed on the 1 year of Yoon coming into power? We will have to see. So this is definitely not the end. The truckers' strike may have failed, but there has been major failures from the Yoon administration and governing as well. And a lot of people are pissed off, and this is not something that the media can just cover up. This has been put out into the open, and it's up to us to try and organize and make much more explicit what those terms were and how they are responsible for this, and how we will try to organize something alternative to this. So I think we might, as Mike mentioned this earlier, but as someone who has become much more involved in a lot of this, we will try and do monthly live streams and try to cover up current events, major social movements, our assessments, reportings, and discussions, speculations in the future. So please do look forward for that as well.
All right. Thank you, comrades. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Bori, Yeonwoo, and Sanggu. I think his internet connection dropped off for a little bit, but yeah, all three of y'all had great, excellent analysis. And yeah, well, this is not just going to be in the ether. This live stream will be a video available on YouTube and elsewhere, and we're going to put it on our podcast feed. So yeah, we're usually an audio-only podcast, but we're going to do more of these live streams. As Bori just said, responding kind of contemporary sort of breaking news events like the strike and this burgeoning movement of the families of the tragic Itaewon disaster, etc. But also just a reminder, we are prepping season 3. We're off all summer. Everybody got busy. Bori was having fun in Europe. One of our other comrades got pulled for some other stuff. Everybody got busy, but the band has always been together. So we've got an exciting season 3 lined up. IMF crisis. We've got a great guest for our first episode coming up. We're going to record that in December. We have a couple episodes left over from season 2 that are currently in the editing process. Those should be out around Christmas. So new content coming soon. Thanks for everyone for joining us tonight. Now's about the time to wrap up because I don't know about you guys, but I want to catch this Croatia versus Brazil World Cup quarterfinal at midnight. But great job, Yeonwoo, Bori, and Comrade Sanggu. Great analysis. So we will see y'all next time. All right. Have a great weekend, everyone. Solidarity to Cheng. Bye-bye, guys. See ya.